back to IB Watching. This is our first official podcast, so let's get right into it.
Today we'll be talking about some current events around the world, including human rights and the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still going on, by the way.
We have to separate facts from our opinions during our podcast. So when we say we're discussing our opinions on topics, please be aware that it's just our opinions, and you don't have to agree with them, nor do you have to listen to them.
All right, now to the first thing on our agenda, the facts on human rights.
Now, if you're living in the United States or anywhere in the Western world at the moment, I'm sure you've heard about the Black Lives Matter movement.
The Black Lives Matter movement, or BLM, has been around since 2013. However, it has sparked back up on its activism after the death of African-American George Floyd.
Floyd died after a police officer knelt on his neck during an arrest for allegedly using a forged bill at a nearby store.
This sparked protests around the United States, however, it quickly moved into being an international movement.
Protests took place in London, Brussels, Seoul, Rio de Janeiro, Sydney, and Idlib, to name a few, covering every major inhabited continent.
While the protests were originally meant to remain peaceful, in some cities around the United States, peaceful protests either turned into violent or they were met with violent opposition.
Although many protests have begun to shrink in size, the message is still being conveyed over social media as well as by continuing protests around the country.
Portland, Oregon has had some of the longest running protests for the BLM movement since the recent spark in activity. Whilst the protests have not been of a purposefully violent nature, federal forces have been deployed to Portland to supposedly de-escalate the situation.
The BLM movement focuses largely on police brutality and bias practiced by the police and the government when it comes to incarcerations and police using lethal force.
The United Nations defines human rights as human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human rights include the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, the right to work and education, and many more.
Unfortunately, this definition is fairly open-ended and does not cover many branches of oppression that's used worldwide.
Moving on to the international issues with human rights, the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine continues to silently claim lives without the United States media coverage.
In Palestine, the police announced a ban on activities by the Palestinian lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender group Al-Cause for Sexual and Gender Diversity in Palestinian Society and vowed to prosecute its members.
Similarly, President Andrzej Duda of Poland stated that the LGBTQ+ movement is advancing ideals more harmful than communism. Since he has been in the office, he has already signed a bill making it so that marriage in Poland can only be between a man and a woman.
War is raging in Armenia, where Turkey and Azerbaijan have begun to target civilian locations such as schools, stores, and neighborhoods. Azerbaijan claims this is due to Armenia occupying Azerbaijani land. Turkey has sided with Azerbaijan for undisclosed reasons, however, due to events in the Armenian genocide in 1914 by Turkey and other parts of the Ottoman Empire, where there is an international skepticism as why they have joined the war. However, Turkey has been forced to stand down due to threats from several world powers.
This is only a brief cover of some of the horrible things going on in the world right now. Now, let's move on to our opinions about these events. Human rights, the opinions section. So, of course, human rights are something that I think kind of everyone has really strong opinions about, and around the world right now, it's 2020, and there's still so many just clear breaches of human rights going on, like especially in Armenia at the moment. Azerbaijan has openly committed several war crimes, and such as the use of large-scale cluster bombs and targeting Holy Land. And as someone who has friends in Armenia and is really emotionally invested in it, I find it kind of just terrifying that things like that are still happening in the modern day. Same as in Palestine. Palestine's been occupied, it's under siege, and there are just lots and lots of people dying, and I don't think I've heard a single American site even try and mention that recently, and that's, kind of scary to me. And honestly, we haven't heard about the genocide going on in Ethiopia either, or in China, and those are only listing active genocides I know about, let alone other ones that I haven't even heard about because the news refuses to cover them. Ethan, what's your opinions on all of this?
Well, given that this is going on in so many different places around the world, I think it's good that we focus on what we can do for ourselves and what we can do to help people around us. And I think that the BLM movement really is being really controversial on a bunch of stuff that you'd think would be really straightforward and it would be quite easy to get on board with. And I think this is mainly due to the way that the media and that everybody is being polarized in this country. What do you think, Gautam?
Yeah, like Ethan said, I think polarization of media is definitely a big problem because media now, rather than doing some sort of honest journalism, they try to attune to their audience more, try to give their audience what their audience wants to hear. And I think part of that is due to this whole like two-party divide that just has, increased in its, antagonistic nature recently. Honestly, I've seen antagonistic nature from both of the two parties, and I honestly think that one of the main ways that we can remove the sort of antagonistic nature, and the reason we want to remove it actually, is because if one side brings up an issue or a solution to some sort of issue, the other side will immediately dismiss it because of the fact that the side that they're not on had brought it up in the first place, despite how right it may be or despite how much it may make sense in an objective manner. Because of the fact that it's brought up by the other side, they immediately dismiss it. So this whole we and them mentality, I feel like that's a really big part of what needs to be fixed. And I feel like one solution to that might be to propose ranked voting in elections, because that way people will be able to vote for third parties without having to worry that their vote would be lost and that they would be throwing their vote away because the third party wouldn't be elected. That way we can kind of step away from this two-party system and kind of get into more what democracy is about.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. I think ranked voting is definitely one way to go about it, but I also feel like, at least in America's version of democracy, which honestly I don't entirely agree with, but in America's version of democracy with the Electoral College and everything, I feel like voting at the moment is very much so, it's kind of rigged to take away the votes from poorer people, from farmers, from fishers, because if you look at the Electoral College, states with big cities definitely have larger, your vote counts about 4 times as much, I believe, in California than it does in Alaska, and I think that's kind of stupid because we're all Americans and our votes should really kind of count one for one, but apparently, according to the Electoral College, if you're in Alaska, your vote is not as important as California or New York or anywhere like that, and I feel like removing that as well would definitely make it so that people's votes counted more and people felt more secure in their elections.
Yeah, I totally agree. The Electoral College is, I don't know, I feel like it was a good idea at the start of our nation in order to make sure that all the states had some sort of merit, but I don't think it quite does the job today.
Yeah, let's see. So, for the Electoral College, I think that the reason that different states have different points that are added to either side for during the election is because of the total population of that state. So if you have a state like California, which happens to be the largest, most populous state in the country, it has the biggest vote because because of how many people actually live there. And as we're somewhere like Wyoming, where it has arguably the least amount of people, it has a smaller vote because there's less people in the country in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the system. I don't know. I think over time it's been slightly broken and should just be revised. Maybe not entirely hard reset, but just revised a little bit, because basing it off of population instead of basing it off population makes it sound like if you live in a more populous place, you're just more important than someone who lives in a less populous place.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to the COVID-19 pandemic. So, I'm sure that all of you have heard about the COVID-19 pandemic. We're all living through it right now.
Okay, so COVID-19 is a virus that affects the lungs and can cause death in anyone. However, it is more likely to kill older people and those with pre-existing medical conditions.
The first confirmed cases of COVID-19 come from Wuhan, China in late 2019. However, research is being conducted currently to see whether the virus actually began in another part of Southeast Asia.
There have actually been over 1 million deaths worldwide from COVID-19, and that number is still growing.
There have also been 37.1 million confirmed cases as of October 10th, most of which have recovered.
Disputes have broken out all across the world about the legitimacy of the virus and what threat it actually poses. The World Health Organization and the United States Center for Disease Control have both published what they believe are the best ways to avoid contracting the virus, but many people choose to ignore these guidelines.
The countries hardest hit by the virus, by sheer number of people who tested positive, are the United States, followed by India, and then followed by Brazil. The countries with the highest case mortality ratios are Mexico, followed by the United Kingdoms, followed by Ecuador.
On October 8th, the number of cases in Western Europe officially overtook the number of cases in America, North and South combined.
And also, due to a technical error, according to Public Health England, the UK miscounted their cases of COVID-19 and severely underestimated them due to Microsoft Excel having a limit of 1,048,576 rows and 16,384 columns per file. This caused the bottom 15,841 records of cases to be cut off of the government numbers of COVID-19 cases in the United Kingdoms. Moving on to our opinions on the pandemic. So, of course, we're living through it. We're currently seniors in high school who have had to go through the first half of our year stuck in the mess that this has caused. But at the moment, I honestly think, at least where we're living, it's being handled, not the United States in general, but Colorado definitely. It's being handled fairly well by the local government, maybe not so well by the federal government, but I think the local government is definitely doing its best. But I definitely feel like the whole international response just could have been better, honestly. This kind of just proved that despite the Spanish flu, the world just was not prepared for another virus to come out like this, apart from the Eastern world, because a lot of the Eastern world, like Korea, Japan, and China, have all handled this fairly well. But the Western world has been hit super hard by this. As you heard, Brazil, the United States, the United Kingdoms, all of which we would have expected to have handled this better, but it really didn't. And that's honestly kind of scary to me to think that it's 2020, we've had to deal with viruses like this before, and somehow we just were not at all prepared for this. Ethan, your opinions?
Well, I do agree with you. I do find it really surprising that the Western world handled this pretty poorly. And I find it really surprising how well the Eastern world handled it. Because given that everyone thinks, well, the Western world is more advanced and has better technology, you'd think that we'd be able to handle it a lot better. But it just showed how unprepared we were overall. And one of the things that I found surprising was how quickly most people were willing to go and change their whole life in the United States to help other people and try to protect other people, like with the lockdowns and everything, and wearing masks, everyone was, for the most part, willing to shut down their life and to stop work to help protect the people around them. Gautam?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Cole said about how our local government handled the pandemic a lot better than our federal government. I feel like on a federal scale, there was a lot more underestimation of what COVID was actually capable of. And in my opinion, I feel like a lot of lives could have probably been saved if there was a more rapid response by the federal government about closing down businesses and trying to keep people quarantined and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that we live in a capitalist society, and people don't particularly like it when the government shuts down business. I mean, I do understand that, but I feel like public health kind of should have taken priority over capitalism, and it did, very briefly. And then we released our restrictions a lot earlier than a lot of the rest of the Western world did, and I feel like maybe we should have valued human life over our economy just for a little bit, which I guess that's coming from someone who's currently not affected by the economy. I don't live by myself. I don't work off of a job and live entirely off of that money, but I understand that some people, of course, did prefer the caring about the economy over caring about public health because they felt like the virus wouldn't affect them because they're not old and they don't have any pre-existing problems. But basically, to sum that all up, I just feel like we should have valued human life over capitalism at the beginning of this whole thing.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think it would have, like, I understand that the economy is going to be hurt by closing down businesses and whatnot, but I feel like it would have been better to have the government give out subsidies to businesses in order to make sure that they're able to live through the pandemic, and then have them still close down in order to help public health, rather than keep them open, and with less subsidies from the government. I feel like the government should have probably intervened a little bit more in public health safety in that situation.
Definitely.
And I find it kind of mind-boggling that there are people still to this day out there that don't believe that this virus is real. Like, I hear it in the school, I hear it at work, I see it on political signs in the streets where I live, that this whole virus is fake and after the elections it'll go away. And to me, that's just mind-boggling because we can see the international numbers. We know that the WHO has been talking about it. And I guess, yeah, if you're a pure blood conspiracy theorist, you might be able to say that we have the WHO under our control. But like, I have family that was directly affected by this in the UK, and I know there's probably lots of people around America who have family outside of the country who have been affected by this. And I think it's just mind-numbing that people actually think this is fake.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. Well, wrapping it all up, I hope that despite all of the terrible things happening in the world today, that you make sure to try and stay happy and healthy.
These are very trying times, and we as civilians need to be on our A game.
Don't forget to subscribe and tune into our next podcast on the election.